Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello, and we're back again for spooky season. So today we're doing something a little differently. We're actually going to do our first TV show. So we've gotten a lot of recommendations for TV shows, a lot of Game of Thrones, which, to be honest, fans, I don't think we're ever going to touch because... never forget the final season of Game of Thrones. But anyway, so we've been trying to figure out a way to do a TV show because it's such a daunting task, especially like the big ones like Game of Thrones where there's so many episodes, so many characters, so many topics. So we're doing a little experiment where we're trying a limited series. So we're doing Haunting of Hill House, and we're doing one episode. So the episode we're talking about today is it's called Two Storms. It's episode 6 of obviously the first season. And we're doing it also because the second limited series, Haunting of Bly Manor, comes out October 9th. So pretty soon after this will be released. And so we really also want to talk about this because the episode Two Storms is something that it's almost like a play in and of itself. Like you could probably watch it out of total context of the rest of the show and still kind of understand what's going on, what we're talking about, and who all the characters pretty much are. It's really like a play, that episode. And so we're going to be talking about just grief, capital G, grief. We've talked about it a lot over the course of many other episodes, but we're going to be really sinking into it today. So we're going to be talking about grief, the 5 stages of grief as popularly known by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. We're going to be talking about survivors of suicide, family systems within grief, and then like re-traumatization, as in this episode specifically, one of the characters has died by suicide, and the mother in this family is died by suicide. So a very brief rundown of a whole TV show is basically what this episode's about is 4 siblings come to the funeral of their sister who allegedly died by suicide just days before. And so they come to the house of the oldest female sibling, Shirley, who's also a funeral director, so she's actually like gotten her ready and embalmed. So the sister who's died named Nellie. So there's several characters we're going to talk about. The siblings are Theo, Steve, Shirley, and Luke, and the deceased sister is named Nellie. So that gives you a brief rundown. So basically the whole episode is them just dealing with the fact that their sister has just passed away.
And the father is also present too.
Yes. In an estranged relationship.
Very estranged relationship because the father has been secret-keeping.
Mm-hmm. Which we have talked about family secrets before, and I am very ready to discuss it again.
As a marriage and family therapist, I very much look forward to hearing your take on that because I feel like this is going to be a Hannah episode.
Yes. Exactamundo.
Yes. Exactly.
So part of why we thought this would be interesting, this episode, is because and part of what compelled us to pick this show, other than the fact that it was a good example of kind of like a bottle episode to kind of get into, was that I know there's been a lot of theories, at least on the version of nerd internet that I frequent, about how each sibling of the show kind of demonstrates a representation of like each stage of grief. And so when we went into kind of like watching the episode, I was keeping that in mind. And though I don't think the siblings, at least in this episode, don't quite fit the stages of grief like people are proposing, I do think it's an interesting opportunity for us to discuss the stages of grief, which we haven't really gone into on the show.
Yes, absolutely.
So the stages of grief are, in short, it's by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So there's kind of this idea that we go through that whole process in that exact order in order to get to the other side of grief, which is Not 100% true.
No, it is 100. People go in and out of various stages. It's not a linear process, and even she makes that quite clear in her writings. But people choose to take simple things that have 5 rules and to make them into, oh, good. So I mean, I go through the anger stage. Next is this stage. No. It means you're going to move in and out of those because grief hits you like a rainbow. It is a multitude of feelings. You cannot look at a rainbow and see green. You see red, purple, orange, indigo, blue, etc. And grief is much like that, where you get hit with a wave of emotions all at once, and one just might be more present than the other at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's kind of, and we'll see this in this episode, I think why people like to think of it in that, like, formula is also because we societally cannot deal with death and the sadness and grief that comes from death. And so I do think we want this formula of like what to expect. Like, I'll just go through these 5 stages and then I'll be done, right?
Right.
Once I hit acceptance, I just got to get through these 5. And once I hit acceptance, I'll be ready to roll as if nothing bad ever happened to me.
I totally agree with that. I feel like I have clients who are seeing me because of a recent passing of a loved one, and they come in with like, well, I feel like I'm in this stage. Like, they're very much, I feel like, is an action. It feels like an action-oriented thing, when I feel like what's so hard for people about grief is the vagueness and the unknowing fact of sometimes it just takes as long as it takes in a lot of different ways. Like, it's different for everybody. And so I think you're absolutely right.
So we see grief represented in this show in very different ways, which is also, I think, what I like about this episode of the show and the writing of it is, like, we see characters like Theo getting wasted and being very angry. Mm-hmm. And then we see people cracking jokes. We see people in active denial. But like, where do we see like denial in this episode, do you think, in terms of like how the siblings deal with grief?
I feel like I see it a little bit with Steve. Initially, when they come in his, I don't know, I guess it's probably a lot more that I just feel like his body language, I feel like, shows a lot that he's not quite ready to wrap his head around the idea of what has happened. I think he very much has been focused on his brother, on getting Luke there and taking care of Luke and making sure that Luke is okay, that when he actually walks up to the coffin, yeah. You can tell that, like, that's when in that moment is the only time that it actually becomes a possibility, because I feel like before he walks up and actually sees her physically, I feel like he is absolutely in denial, even though it's happened and had happened, I think, a couple, like, days before that. Like, I don't think it had been I don't think it had been right away. And so, and also knowing that Luke is the twin of Nellie, who has passed.
I mean, I think you definitely see denial, and you see like multiple characters sort of like almost go to the casket and then back off. They can't really see her yet. And it is that idea of like, if I don't see them yet in the casket, like, it's not real yet. And then you do see like that physical, almost like pretty much physical, like, wave go over them.
Yes.
When they do actually go up to the casket and like see her in there.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of it in Luke because he has the hardest time walking up to the casket. He's the one, he can't even walk in the room. He walks in the room, turns around, walks out.
Yeah.
And then needs a break and has to go back in, and he's battling addiction at the same time. And I think that we see a lot of it in him, and I think we see a lot of it in the dad. A lot of denial that the relationships are as messed up as they are.
Which is another element to the show, which is just like the family dynamics. Is I think there's just a lot of, I mean, and Steve too, like, he's also in active denial that they lived in a haunted house. That's what's so crazy about this show.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about denial,
Steve
is denial. I mean, maybe we should go through a quick rundown of character because everybody remembered, because I needed, it came back to me when I watched the show, but, you know, when we talk about the siblings, so the story of the Haunting of Hill House involves a family that moves into this haunted house that they flip houses and they move into this massive mansion that is haunted and tries to basically digest the souls of people who are there, and the house, instead of the ghosts in the house, end up being the villain of the story.
Mm-hmm. And so the show flashes back to when they're kids and they live there for a summer, and then it ends with their mom allegedly committing suicide, but it's always like questioned. Like, was she mentally ill, or was it the house? Did they really live in a haunted house, or were they all mentally ill in some capacity? And so Steve...
And did Dad kill her?
Yes. And then post them living in the house, they went to stay with their Aunt Janet, and so they've never really like been with their dad since then. And Nellie and Luke were like really little, like 6 when that happened.
And they're twins. So with the siblings...
And they're the youngest.
So
is Steve the oldest?
Steve's the oldest, then Shirley, then Theo, and then the twins, Luke and Nellie.
Okay.
So when we talk about them, kind of like, we should probably remind people what they do and who they are. So Steve is an author.
Yes.
Steve wrote the story of their experience in Hill House and sold it, and it was a very successful author, and goes around investigating people's ghost stories for them at their houses, and makes quite a bit of money, to which most of the family has denied their royalties, or so we think, at least at the start of this episode. And then Shirley is a funeral director.
Yes.
And Theo is a psychologist who is living in Shirley's kind of
like
spare
carriage
garage,
house.
right? Because her carriage house, right? Because she can't seem to, despite being a caregiver, can't seem to care for herself and get her life together. Mm-hmm. And then Luke is
in recovery
for heroin.
I think so, yeah.
At least heroin, if not a polysubstance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
And then we had
Nellie,
who was afflicted with sleep paralysis.
Yes.
And also lost her husband.
Yes. To like something like an aneurysm or something.
An aneurysm, but she couldn't help him or call because she was in sleep paralysis.
Yes.
When he died.
So basically we're dealing with a family that's been heavily traumatized.
In all different ways. And they've all... And essentially Steve has been the one who talks about it being mental illness and not really believing or buying into the idea that the house was actually haunted, which is actually what has caused some of the afflictions that his siblings struggle with, that it's not necessarily that they had mental illness before that, but that after having the experiences that they have in the haunted house, that really exacerbates anything, especially with Luke and Nellie, who are the youngest, who are 6.
Yeah. And so Steve is a person who lives in a state of denial, or at least he's trying to rationalize, which is denial too, everything that's happened to them. And though he is believing in like the mental illness part of it, which would seem more appropriate in this context, actually is like, if this was in a haunted house story, you'd be like, oh, great, someone's believing in mental health. Love that for them. Mm-hmm. But I think in this story, it's actually the ironic part is that by believing in mental health so hard, he's actually trying to rationalize something that's not rational. And that's more what we see kind of, I would say, in family systems or that aren't getting along, is when one person has a story about what's happened and refuses to acknowledge the other family's experience.
Which is invalidation.
Yes.
Which is a tremendous problem. Whether you agree or not, it does not matter. You need to be able to hear the other person's experience and understand that whether or not it's real for you, it was real for them, and you need to meet them there.
And so the Kubler-Ross definition of denial is individuals believe the diagnosis is somehow mistaken and cling to a false preferable reality, which is where Steve's at. Is like, I can believe that Nellie's dead if it's in this context. And I can't believe any other story. And if you try to make me believe in any other story, he like doubles down in the episode and just gets really angry and just won't back down from that fight.
Right. Because, so I guess something else important to mention about her research is that it started out with the 5 stages of dying. Mm-hmm. Not just grief.
Yeah.
It was 5 stages of what people go through as they are dying and grief for themselves. Mm-hmm. Which is why that rejecting the diagnosis part comes in her definition. So I feel like that's an important distinction to mention too.
That's totally. That's very true.
That makes sense. I didn't know that, or I sure as fuck didn't remember.
That's another. It's like it's so popular in the cultural zeitgeist. To use a word that now Brittany has implanted in my skull, is that it started out as the 5 stages of dying. of what you go through individually, and now it is generalized to what we all go through in grief so much that we have to even remind ourselves that it's not just about that. It's more. It was originally focused on that. It's expanded now, but it's important to remember that, and that's why things like the diagnosis need to make sense. Because if you're given a cancer diagnosis and told you're terminal, and go like, yeah, no, that's probably not true. I need to get at least another 17 opinions.
Yeah. Yeah. When people, go to doctor because they can't deal. Or when people get a diagnosis, they don't tell anybody for a while. That's also a form of denial. If I don't tell anyone else, or if I don't go seek treatment after this, it's not real.
Right.
And I feel like I've seen denial in real life in terms of having a loved one who was put on hospice and having one of the siblings actually not believe that they were actually terminal and was trying to put all these things in, like that the person has to go on walks this certain amount of days, and like they should be doing this and they should be doing this, and when really the person was given a terminal diagnosis and was on hospice. And so the denial being that no, they really are going to be okay, we just have to do all these things, like being very concrete and again, in some ways I feel like the denial shows up as being like a little bit like delusional in terms of what is actually happening in the moment. Like they're very, in some ways, are just disconnected from that.
And denial makes you act kind of odd. Like, I think we see that in the episode when Steve walks up to the casket and sees her.
Yeah.
And starts being like, you're right, detective. That's her. Positive. It starts being super weird.
Oh, that super awkward joke that was
and then he just
uncomfortable
goes
in your soul.
And then he goes and sits down, like he plunks down into a chair and is just like staring into like the middle distance.
Yeah.
Because like that denial is really like
it's a lens. It's almost like a lens that you see things through.
And when you see the literal dead body, you can't really deny anymore. Like that's that on that, which I think is why you see that abrupt like whoof from both Luke and Steve, but definitely Steve.
Yeah, yeah.
Steve looks like he got hit by a car.
Yeah, I think that's why I feel like that's why I brought it up with him, because I feel like that response was very. Just really intense, and kind of it's written all over his face.
And by making it a joke too, you're still staying in the denial state where you're like, it's not a big deal. Like we're all just, you know what I mean? You're still staying in this very like superficial place in your brain because you're not quite coming to terms yet with the fact that like what's really happening in front of you. And that's why you'll see people at funerals be super weird. Like they'll crack jokes, they'll screw around. You know what I mean? Like everyone's kind of presentation at a funeral will be different because everyone will be in these different stages of grief. And because I think the next one, anger, is, I would say, what we see most presently in this episode. So the way that they talk about anger in the definition is when the individual recognizes that denial cannot continue, they become frustrated, especially at proximate individuals. Certain psychological responses of a person undergoing this phase would be, why me? It's not fair. How can this happen to me? Who is to blame? And why would this happen?
And oh man, do we see who is to blame coming, oozing out of Theo and Steve.
Theo, Steve, even Shirley. I feel like every person, except for maybe Luke and the dad, has like an intense anger reaction. I think for multiple reasons. One, because it's a phase of grief, which is that. And two, because, not to get too tangled up in the other topic, because their sister died of suicide. And so I think because of that context, there can be a lot more room to blame. Like, she called all of them the day that it happened. And so, like, why didn't you pick up? Kind of what, like, Shirley was saying, why wouldn't she talk to me? Like, even blaming the person, you know, who committed suicide or completed suicide. Like, why wouldn't she have talked to me? Like, even, like, you hear Shirley even getting angry and blaming Nellie for dying.
Yeah, it takes Shirley a while to crack, though.
Yeah. And when she does, oof, she does.
She does. And she I think, has the most dramatic anger response, because Theo's just angry all the time. Yes. Period.
Yes, Theo is angry. Theo begins drinking immediately. She literally says, like, I take a drink every time I want to punch someone in the face.
And then says, punch, punch,
yes,
punch.
So she lives in the land of anger.
And
Theo.
I feel like in some ways too, that as you learn more about the trauma of the family, kind of in general, like I feel like her response has always been anger, and that's something that we've talked about before, that just covers up all the other emotions that we're having. That anger is one of those things that really can blanket so many different things that are happening. So I do feel like I feel like she very much is angry at the world in a very specific way about this happening. So it's still related to her sister, but about this happening. And I feel like everyone else, is some of them are angry at Nellie in general. And I feel like Theo's just like mad at everything. I don't know if you guys felt the same way.
No, she's angry at, the world is a good starting point with her. The universe, the galaxy, all of it.
Yes.
And she deals with her anger by using substances. And
Right.
it's also something that, their brother Luke does,
and
uses
verbal abuse.
Yes.
Profound verbal abuse of others in her life.
Very irritable presentation is how we would say.
Very sarcastic, very antagonistic.
Well,
She doesn't let you in at all.
yeah, I was going to say, she has her fucking backup all the time.
She's guarded.
And I would imagine that her using substances is probably part of the reason why she lives in the coach house.
Yeah.
Probably. Well, because
Well,
her relationship blew up.
Well, it's because she uses both substances and like going out and engaging in like meaningless sexual encounters, which for whatever casual sex like is people's bag. Like who cares? No judging here. But it seems like she intentionally kind of is cruel to it seems like the women she picks up.
Yeah.
Like very guarded, very like I don't get close to anybody. She uses anger the way that a lot of people use anger, which is to keep an arm's length from everybody around them. No one wants to engage with someone who is that pissy.
And she also tries to engage with straight women or closeted women. Unless I'm remembering incorrectly.
No, I think she goes to gay clubs. And specifically picks up gay
There
women.
was something at a funeral, right, or something where there was a scene where she had gotten involved with a person who was either straight or closeted, and
Oh.
unless I'm remembering something totally different, and movies are blending together in my head, but
I don't know, man. I got nothing. I'm trying to. I feel like I'm there with you, but another part of me is like, we watched like 2 different shows last night, and I just don't fucking remember.
like I'm
So
seeing her.
I'm like, oh, was that a part of this?
She comes out of like a back room or a bathroom with somebody.
Oh, yes. At Shirley's wedding, she screws around with
The
one
bridesmaids.
of the bridesmaids.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say, and probably the most tried and true presentation of like denial going into anger is with Steve. As soon as he gets through the denial phase, he goes right into anger.
Yep.
Like he almost goes straight from seeing his sister in the casket to yelling in their dad's face.
Who's responsible? You're responsible. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He goes straight into it, and then it's not about him anymore. It's about everybody else, and who other than him is to blame for things being so bad.
Yeah. And pointedly into their dad's face, which is an easy person to blame.
Very easy. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we will get to that later.
Yeah. And so then, do you want to get more into anger? I feel like anger is like the bread and butter of this episode, but we'll probably get into that more also with the other topics.
And I feel like we don't need to explain anger to people.
Yes, they see it. So then bargaining is the third stage, which involves the hope that the individual can avoid a cause of grief. Usually the negotiation for an extended life is made in exchange for a reformed lifestyle. So basically it's like people, I think the typical way we think of it is like God, if like when people pray, like God, if you let my daughter live, I will go to church every Sunday and never swear.
Yeah.
Or if you let me live, I'll stop eating cheeseburgers. I'll stop drinking the wine. I'll stop doing this. I'll stop doing that. It's all about like creating some sort of way to control
Yes.
what's going on, that as you're facing your existential crisis that your life is ending, which is the existential crisis that your
Yes.
existence is going to cease, that the last grasps of trying to negotiate for control of it. And I feel like you see this a lot in situations in movies where someone knows they're going to be killed, and then they start trying to negotiate with the killer for all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good actually example of what I feel like it looks like. Because I also feel like sometimes it's people who have lost someone, also sometimes who then try to bargain in terms of, I don't ever want to feel this badly again, or I don't ever want to have to feel this sad. And then so I feel like sometimes people then try to make changes in their life around that to like try to avoid, where they're either straight up just trying to avoid people in their life, or they are, I don't know if it would even be just like putting a guard up with other people for a little while. But so I feel like the bargaining piece goes back and forth. I don't know who I feel like that matches.
Shirley.
I was
Shirley?
Say, I think Shirley in the fact that I think she's very controlling. In that I think she tries to be like, if I do this, if I do that, then it won't hurt as bad. I feel like it's not so much bargaining. It's kind of like negotiating. In the sense of like, if I don't, like by like doing the embalming myself, by doing like the funeral myself, which is a horrible thing for her to take on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like then it gives her the opportunity to be like that role in the funeral.
Right.
Like I'm not really grieving as a sibling because I'm like,
I'm busy. I'm running it.
I'm the mortician.
Like when the casket falls down.
That's when she loses her shit.
Well, no, she goes, oh, I got to fix her makeup. I'm going to go get the kit and fix her makeup.
Yeah. Like
it's like she's not letting herself feel. She is. So it's kind of like denial and bargaining combined. Like, I'm going to take care of this part of it. Mm-hmm. Like also when she mentions earlier in the episode, like, I fixed all the light bulbs. Or like I checked all the light bulbs yesterday. Mm-hmm. Just in case any of them went out today and I didn't have time to do it.
Yep. She's bargaining. If I can keep myself in this role, I don't have to feel. Like, she's 100% there.
Yeah, and I mean,
total agreement.
And even expanding outside of this episode, I think she does the sense of kind of what you brought up, Hannah, which is, I won't have to feel this way again, where she becomes a funeral director after their mom dies as a way to
control death,
yes. And so she definitely...
She's got a lot.
Is the bargaining piece.
Yeah.
And her husband is the same. He tries to play, instead of dealing with the awkwardness every time, and Theo just flat calls his ass on it. But every time every time he tries to do something, every time something gets uncomfortable, he starts offering food and becomes a waiter.
And that was kind of mean when she said that.
It was very mean.
I thought so too, because I feel like as being a partner to someone who is experiencing a lot of grief, even though the partner might also have close relationships with the family members, that can just be that's just a really hard spot to be in. So just trying to be supportive. So I agree. I feel like she was I feel like she was snapping at him.
And I think what's hard when you're in the maybe like the denial or the bargaining stage and other people around you aren't in those stages, where they're in other stages like anger and depression, it can seem very invalidating because it's almost like, why are you being emotional? I don't know. She has a very energy of like...
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Like, because she's kind of like shitting on Theo for being drunk, and like she's really not giving other people, especially when she gets angry, like other people space to be messy.
Yeah.
Even though she is also messy, but likes to pretend that she's not messy.
Exactly. She likes to ignore it.
Right. And we see Luke in a lot of this too.
Well, I think he's more of the next stage, which is depression.
Yeah,
I feel like just sad.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like you are, when you're just kind of sad. And it's more like, not just like I'm sad and really feeling it. It's more like, because the definition sort of talks about like pointless, like hopelessness sad. Like, what's the point? Like when you're like down in the dumps, like true, like nothing matters sadness.
He has that, but he also goes through various points in time where he's bargaining about using substances.
Yes, which is, I feel like, pretty classic. Like, I won't use again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's total classic. But we see him kind of in that phase with, if I can just do this, I can be better. I can be better if I get a chance to do this. He does some degree of it, too. But, it's tied into substance, so that's where it gets into a differential diagnosis question with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we ever see any other, like, I don't think they get to that stage in this episode. I don't think any of them make it to all the way to depression. Unless I'm missing something.
I mean, Luke is always there.
Well, he's there, definitely. But I
and
feel
so
like...
is the dad.
I feel like the dad's almost at acceptance, which is the 5th stage, which is where you accept.
I feel like I have so many things to say about the dad. I don't even know what to say. I feel like he's just so disconnected from so many things. Like, even when we see him looking at the kids through his own eyes and he sees them as children, like, I feel like dad is so disconnected from, because he has literally been disconnected from his children for all of their lives. I mean, all of their lives once his wife died. So he has been separated with them for upwards of, 20 years by now, like, at least I would say. So even I guess for me, the dad is tricky in terms of, is he having a response to, clearly he's having a response to his daughter being dead and dying in a similar way that his wife died. However, a part of me also kind of feels like, is this just him reacting to being in this space at this time? Not that he's not sad about Nellie dying, but like, I feel like his response to being in the room with all of his kids is overwhelming everything else. I don't know if that makes sense.
Because he has a very, like, what I would consider, what we call in the field, a constricted affect, which is where you're not like flat, where you're blank, but you're not showing a lot of emotion on your face, basically. But you're not, like, dead looking on your face. Because he sees his daughter who has died, and, like, he looks kind of sad, but, like, it's almost like he's on something and it's keeping him very stunted. Like, he's not having a big reaction in any way.
Yeah.
He is distracted. I mean, we find out later he's distracted. This show's so crazy. Because we find out later he's distracted because he's talking to his dead wife the whole time.
Yeah, because he's always talking to her.
Yeah.
Always.
So he's also
a whole other grief thing that's happening.
So you can make the argument that, is he really going through the stages of grief because he's so distracted by what we would call internal stimuli?
Yeah.
Which is, he's hearing things that aren't there.
But is it internal stimuli, or is it the ghost visiting him?
Exactly.
Which makes it hard in a ghost story to go, is he making this interaction with her up, or is she actually visiting him, since she is actually an eternal ghost and he knows that?
Which, let's get into it. So this is what complicates the 5 stages of grief, I feel like, for this family, is that if death isn't real, like if death isn't the end,
yes,
then how do you go through these 5 stages of grief? And I think the dad, because of the experience with the possibly spirit of his wife, maybe has never really gone through all the stages of grief, because for him, like, his wife never really died, and therefore can he even, like, conceptualize that Nellie's really died? So it's almost like you can stay in a space of denial forever.
But is it denial because they're still, their spirits live on in the, age, trapped in the age they were when they died forever? Because that's the curse of Hill House, right? Is that if you die in the house, then your spirit stays there, but you're stuck at the age that you were, which is why the Hill's children, the one in the wheelchair, he died. Why Mr. Hill is the top hat guy?
The bowler hat guy?
The bowler hat guy, yeah, that's him.
He's scary.
Scary.
Yep. And why we see her still. Oh, is she the old lady and the flapper?
What?
She's the
flapper.
So are you talking about, not to confuse the listeners, you're talking about the original woman who lived in the house.
The original
who we
Hills.
see in later episodes.
Yep.
Who has red hair, I think, and is a flapper, and whose baby dies?
There's a lot of death in that
house.
house.
There's a lot of death in this house.
Yeah, let's just go with that, because I feel like otherwise this is going to be so confusing.
See, this is why
there's several ghosts in the house.
This is why we're trying out a TV show, because I feel like it's going to be hard.
Because 10 hours is a lot to keep track of, as opposed to 1 or 2 hours.
So be patient with us, y'all.
Yeah,
we're trying.
But yeah, anyway, like it's. I don't, to make it back into real life rather than get into like the weird, like, because this is going to go off the rails anyway. Is I feel like I encounter this when I deal with people that have different spiritual beliefs.
Oh, and that's a good point. That's
children.
A good point.
It's especially children who are struggling to understand the way parents are putting things, which, like grandma's in a better place or grandma's in heaven looking, and then people freak out when their kid is talking to grandma, and they can't figure out that, like, it's whether it's is depending on their spiritual beliefs. Is grandma visiting the child and talking to him? Is that her her spirit coming? Is that an angel version of grandma now? Is it a ghost? Is grandma stuck? People go through this kind of crisis depending on what their belief state is on spirits and ghosts, whether spirits are all good and angels, whether spirits are all bad and trapped, whether spirits are unresolved and need help moving on. There's so much. Or whether they kind of hang around for a while until they're ready to leave. I have heard all of these things in sessions with people, and people's beliefs vary wildly depending on their family of origin stories, their own personal beliefs about spirituality and death and dying, and their religious views. And I feel like it can really complicate the process of moving through grief when people don't know, like, are they still here and just in another form?
Yeah.
Or are they gone forever? Because when there's some degree of finality to it, people find an easier way to move on, or so they think, is what one of the lies that I think people tell themselves is. But
no doubt,
like as far as like moving through these stages, it starts to complicate where people are and why it is not a linear process. Because depending on belief state, people are going to go through several different versions of this, and it's difficult to even track where they are because you don't know which way they're conceptualizing it, and if they have a moment where they encounter that person, is it a hallucination out of depression? Is it a spirit visiting you from another plane? Is it an angel? Is it a gift? Is it a curse? Is it them telling you they need help? Are they stuck? Are they stuck in between worlds, or do you need to help them resolve something? There's so many complicating factors, and why it makes it difficult to analyze what's going on with Dad, because the way Timothy Hutton portrayed him was sort of like you see when you're dealing with someone who is responding to internal stimuli, where he's like turning and talking to someone, but we see in later episodes that she's there.
Yeah.
I don't think you see that until episode 7. The one after that, you see...
Yeah, I think you're right.
That she's there. She's talking to him.
And it would be... And I think you make a good point, like, Ben, is that, like, in working with someone like the dad who would come in your office and say, like, I'm talking to my dead wife, she's still here. Like, you'd have to do a lot of, like, differentiating diagnosis with him of, like, is he truly, like, having, like, hallucinations? Which makes him feel like she's really there. Or is it more like a spiritual belief of, like, our loved ones are always with us? And then it would also be a thing of, like, if he wants to keep talking to his wife, you know, whatever, is it getting in the way of, like, his ability to take care of himself and the quality of his life?
Absolutely.
So, like, if he's fine talking to his dead wife like she's there for the rest of his life, whatever. But with his case, though, it's obviously impaired his relationship with his children and his ability to, like, literally move on with his life. Like, he's been stuck in this space for the last, 20-some years?
But here's where the mental health thing comes in, is, like, is it mental health if he's right?
Well, now we're getting into ergo surreal, and we gotta watch it.
I mean, but...
I don't think we can answer that question today.
We can't answer that question today, but what we can do is posit the question so that we make sure that we're iterating to our listeners that the most important thing to do is make sure that before you slap a diagnosis on fucking anybody, that someone is not interacting with their spiritual beliefs in a way that does not cause marked disturbance.
Absolutely.
Which is in the DSM for every criteria at the end of everything. This causes marked disturbance, and this is not caused by a medical or other condition. And I feel like people, especially amateur armchair psychologists, ignore the fuck out of that. And go like, oh, well, this person's hallucinating, but they were using a shit ton of, like, weed. And were in a space where they were paranoid as hell. So I think they might have schizophrenia. And you go like, what did you just say?
Yeah, exactly.
What? Why were they paranoid? Did they stop being paranoid when they weren't being
When they
high?
weren't high? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, then rule it out. Or is seeing angels part of their spiritual belief and they find that comforting, and it doesn't actually create a situation where we think they're interacting with hallucinations, that it's more of a spiritual belief and finding a sense of comfort. It's totally a different thing. And I have encountered that with clients before where they're like, you know, like mom visits me in ways and it's not disturbing. And they are not psychotic.
Yeah.
I just feel like the amount of people that I have worked with who have had significant loss in their life, not that every loss isn't significant, but like someone who, when they passed, rocked their identity in terms of who they were and how they saw the world, which we've definitely talked about in terms of grief in general before. And I feel like I'm always try to be very careful around whatever they say or however they feel that they're being connected to their loved one or not connected to their loved one or feeling like they're around them or whatever the case may be, how important that is. And the amount of times that I feel like especially when someone is specifically seeing me because they've just lost someone, is them saying, this is going to sound crazy. The amount of times that I feel like I hear that whenever the session is around grief happens so often. And I'm just saying, I was like, well, what, I was like, well, tell me about it. Like, what, and then and we never ever have to go back to whether or not that's crazy, because that's not what this is about. This is more about the person's experience and how they're able to process grief and what that looks like. I feel like, Ben, when you're talking about the different beliefs and how that can really shape the way that a person would even look at grief, because if they feel like they're going to see them again, I don't know that I've ever thought about it like that. And I feel like that makes so much sense just in terms of, especially in terms of the dad, right? Because if he's like, oh, I'm going to be able to see Nellie because I can see my wife, like, again, his kind of like awkward acceptance in some ways, right? Of like, yeah, she's over there. I see her as a little girl. That makes me feel sad. But I feel like he doesn't have to actually let go.
Yeah.
No, and he doesn't. And he also has been carrying that because of his agreement with the Dudleys. We can't forget, because he made the agreement with them to carry that, to not further tarnish the mother's relationship, because
the housekeepers are the Dudleys.
The housekeepers are the Dudleys, right? Because his wife killed their daughter with poison tea.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
And she died in the house. So now they begged him to not destroy the house, which is what he wanted to do, to destroy the house, because their daughter, like his wife, was trapped there. So he has this other purpose tied to it that he owes them, because the bargain he made with Mr. Dudley was that he wouldn't point out that his wife was murdered their child, in exchange that when they died, they could die in the house and be with their daughter again forever. But the only way they could do that is if they're Crain, right?
Huh? Their last name is Crain.
Right. If Mr. Crain did not destroy the house.
Yeah.
The only way they could see their daughter regularly was that. So he.
And that's bargaining too.
But again, this is where it gets, because his ghost story gets fucked up, is that he you have to factor in the weight on this man of how he has to carry all of that around to know that their mother is there in this house, that she's there, that the girl is there, that he has to keep that house there, and now it's claimed his daughter because of it.
Yeah.
And now that's his fault. But he couldn't tell anybody the true secret or what happened, that their mother actually killed the daughter,
which we'll get into when we talk about family systems.
Right. Sorry.
Well, I think
there's so many layers.
I know, and I
it's
hear
hard
you.
to keep it all straight, because
it is.
Because what further we've already kind of referenced. What further complicates, it's not just a cut and dry, like their sister died, like maybe in a car accident, and they are all just like a regular schmegular family, and they come together and they're all just freaking out on each other.
Right.
This is complicated also by the fact that she died of suicide, and she died of suicide in the same place and in the same way that their mother died of suicide when they were all kids, and none of them, as far as I know, have ever dealt with that trauma. So what complicates this whole story is not just the ghost part of it, but more realistically is they are re-traumatized. I think they're all being re-traumatized by their mother's death, with Nellie's death. And the fact that it was also a suicide, like I said, in that house. And that's, I think, part of why there's a lot of the blaming, too. Like, Steve saying, this is all happening because no one in this fucking family can acknowledge mental illness. And so this shit's going to keep happening until we all open our fucking eyes. Like, that's kind of why he starts getting really angry and starts yelling at everybody. Which is, if he truly believes that, is true. Like, I mean, I can definitely understand that thought point. Like, because we haven't dealt with our childhoods, we're going to continue to be in this situation, and so we all are to blame.
And also, I think it's his way of trying to control, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like, that's part of how he's trying to control things. And I feel like the other reason why it makes a lot of sense that none of them have been able to process what happened to their mom is because they also then had another trauma immediately after that, which was their dad leaving them with an aunt. So it would make a lot of sense that they wouldn't be able to process the trauma of what happened. And then they also are separated from their other connection, their other primary caregiver, like within weeks or days of all of those things happening for multiple different reasons that are also explained more, that are explained in the show. So also just knowing that sometimes, especially knowing that kids would be in survival mode, which we've definitely talked about before, that there's just so many different layers. Again, there's so many different layers to this and to how this family consistently doesn't deal with the different things that are happening and have this based on the way that the family system is set up.
And also something you come across with families with a shared trauma is like everyone having a different narrative about the trauma.
Yeah.
And then everyone getting frustrated, angry, disappointed, invalidated, etc. by the other people in their family for not having the same narrative. Like, there can be so much hurt by being told that your narrative isn't the same narrative like that your sibling had.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's a big part of why all these siblings are so angry with each other, is that they all have told each other, like, themselves a different story about what happened. And no one's really, but they all kind of I think they all kind of know that it was some supernatural shit, but they won't go there. Or there are different levels of accepting that, and that's when they getting so angry with each other.
Luke believes it.
Luke believes it, but then they also said, you were 6. You don't even remember what mom looked like.
Luke and Nellie believe in the supernatural side of it. But then
when he brings it up, they immediately cut him off at his knees.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you don't even remember mom. Like, what are you talking? Like, Nellie wouldn't remember mom. You don't even remember mom. So they're
wonder
constantly
why he uses drugs.
Yeah. So they're constantly fighting each other in that episode about what was the truth about their childhood.
Yeah.
So even then, they're like, we can't support each other until we agree on the same narrative, which is something I've working with families, like I said, like, you come across that. Like, it's really hard to accept that you all have different perceptions of your childhood, especially because when you're a kid, like, our memories are notoriously unreliable. That's why eyewitness testimonies shouldn't be accepted into courts. And so supposedly every time we remember something, we're remembering the last time we remembered it, is something I've heard. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I think it's that same thing where, like, they were all so young when this happened. They've all been told so many different stories about what happened.
Yeah.
And so they all have a different narrative, but then they're all digging their heels in about what their truth is. Or at least Shirley and Steve.
No, absolutely. Well, and I think, and Luke just dealing with the fact that his family has never believed him.
Yes.
Right? Like, he's experienced trauma of seeing ghosts and seeing supernatural things his whole life, and has been consistently, overwhelmingly told that he is wrong, that that's not what it was, and that isn't what happened. And so he is, that's a way that the family gets set up, right? Everybody has a role. I don't know if we just want to start talking about that.
So what is acceptance?
Yeah, fuck.
Before we go there,
oh my God.
Maybe we should cover what acceptance is.
Well, we did cover what acceptance was.
No, we stopped at depression, then we went off the rails.
We sure did.
Nope. Acceptance is individuals embrace mortality or inevitable future, or that a loved one or other tragic event. People dying may precede the survivors in this state, means that the people who are actively dying will probably accept that they're this before the survivors, the people in their lives, which typically comes with a calm, retrospective view for the individual and a stable condition of emotions.
Which, you want to know what one of the best shows for this is Scrubs. Going through this, Scrubs does a tremendous job of kind of working through this. I know there's one episode in particular where a woman's dying of kidney disease, and they're like, you have to get the the doctors go through the 5 stages of grief, and they walk through it because she starts at acceptance. They tell her she's going to die, and she says, okay. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, you have to get dialysis. Nope. Like, you have to do this. No, I don't. I don't have. And then JD goes through the 5 stages of grief, and you watch him work through it, and the way they kind of go through that in this episode is phenomenal. But you see an interesting point where you reach someone who has hit the point of acceptance where they're going, I have done all I needed to do. Prolonging my life will put me into pain and discomfort, and my family will then have memories of me seeing me in ways I did not want them to remember me. I will become a burden to them. I will become in medical debt. I will go through a lot of these things that really won't extend my life more than another 3 months. I'm choosing to die today.
I think Shirley presents like she's in acceptance for parts of the episode.
Yeah.
When she's like comforting the other siblings. But I think that's more of her being in the role of funeral director / big sister. And also I think because she's around death a lot. Like as a funeral director, she's had the ability to come to terms more with the idea of death as a concept.
I don't think any of them are in acceptance until the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't even think she's connected to that part of herself.
Nope.
That's true.
To be able to be at acceptance, because I don't feel like she either. I don't think any of them have processed the trauma from their mom. So I don't know that she would even be able to recognize it if it was going to like slap her in the face.
Well, and she definitely is in anger. Like she's the first one to do like the blaming.
The second her veil drops, we see her lose her shit.
Like she's very cruel when she's angry.
She's pretty volatile. In one point in this episode.
Towards the end, she gets very like after that casket falls, like all like when we see the coins on the eyes.
Yes.
That's when she really loses her shit. Like she becomes mean, and I don't think she's anywhere near acceptance. I think the dad is closest to acceptance, but I don't think any of the rest of them are anywhere near it. And I think Steve gets there. I don't remember. I haven't watched the end of it in a while, and I almost wish I had gone back. But I remember that Steve reaches a point where he realizes how fucking wrong he is in everything.
Yes.
Apologizes to his wife. Goes back. They get pregnant or something because she's pregnant at the end, right? And
that was part of. Well, let's not get caught up in it, but that was also part of like the fantasy the house was selling him.
Right.
So I don't know if she actually was pregnant in the end or if that was part of the fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I said that's the director went. I meant it to be the truth, but the fact that you're thinking about it even that way makes the
ending
effective and makes the ending effective, and the show did what I wanted to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we see him and some of the others start moving to a place where they accept. Part of acceptance is accepting your shit. Like your role in things and recognizing what you need to do and change, and the family that's surviving at the end, we do see them all reach that point where they are in a place where they look like they can move beyond this house and start having a life again and redefining who they are without it. And that is what the spirit of acceptance is. It's like for people that are dying to accept, I'm dying. Nothing is going to change that. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can fix it. All I can do is live the time that I have and then let go when it's time to let go. People who reach that mentality is what it's for. But then when it gets expanded into the model of grief and loss, of how do we adjust to this and allow our lives to move forward and not let it be at the forefront of our mind every day, all day anymore.
For sure. And I think one other layer that also complicates this what we see at the funeral home is the dynamic of them all being siblings. And being siblings that haven't, like the family dynamics within grief, both in this context and overall. Like, I think with, like, I think I mentioned before, like with Shirley, like she goes into like big sister mode really quickly of like, I'm not going to feel anything, so I'm going to take care of everybody else. And then I think Steve has a little bit of that too. Like he gets Luke, he puts Luke on the plane, and he doesn't really, all he's thinking about is getting Luke to Nellie's funeral. And I think where it's cool is what we haven't really referenced as of yet is like this episode's also interspersed with like flashbacks from a night when they were kids. And you definitely see them as kids and during this kind of like traumatizing event being put into these roles of like big siblings versus little siblings, where Steve is I think I wrote it down. He says specifically, he'll never let anything happen to them. Like promising his siblings that he'll never let anything bad happen to them. And I think Shirley the same thing too. Like her mom sends her to make cocoa because the younger kids are scared.
Yeah.
And so we see like, and this happens in every family. It's not like a bad thing the parents are doing where you put like the older siblings into these very like caretaker roles that will carry with them their whole lives. I mean, we won't get into this, but like there's like the concept of birth order, right? I think it's Adler.
Yes.
Yep.
And where like older siblings are like more independent. They're like, have more of the alpha dynamic and things like that. And so I do think we see that here. And I think especially Shirley, I think falls into that role as a way to not deal with Nellie's death.
Yeah.
And very bossy too. Like I think like the way that she's judgmental of Theo and stuff like that, I think is her also being like the big sister.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
A big sister takes on caregiving roles and disciplining roles, and I feel like in a lot of ways that's kind of what we're seeing her do. And also that knowing that then her mom dying, probably that role only got reinforced.
Yeah.
Which is why we see it as grown-ass people, that it's still kind of happening, which just happens, if you talk to anyone who has siblings, I know that there's always this chance of when you go back home and you're all together that all of a sudden you are acting in a way that maybe you haven't acted in a really long time. Yes. Because it has a lot to do with the way that the role that we play in our family. So I feel like that definitely does add a layer to what stage of grief that people might be in
or just like their presentation within grief. Like it's not just, because like they've all been here and there, they're like have relationships, but for the most part as adults they're all pretty separate from each other, with the exception of like Theo living in Shirley's like carriage house. But as soon as they're together, like it does feel like they snap into those roles where everyone's like kind of taking care of Luke. You know what I mean? Like he's sitting on the couch. They all go towards Luke. They get him on the plane. They figure him out. No one's really expecting anything of Luke.
Yeah.
And then everyone's expecting Shirley to take the lead. There's a lot of onus on Steve to take the lead. And feeling like the rub of that roles. And also Shirley saying like, I decided no one was going to take royalties for Steve's book. And because I decided no one was going to, no one better have.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is high big sister energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like and also for someone who's been put into a parent role.
Yeah.
Of like, I made the decision for the whole family and not realizing how much you are speaking for other people and how disrespectful that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you're taking away the autonomy of your siblings. Like, you're not their parent.
Yeah.
But her definitely feeling like she's allowed to do that.
But also maybe being told that she was allowed to be the parent because her mother died.
Oh, no, that's exactly what I mean.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Because gender roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's a different discussion that we'll go into.
Never, because we're not talking about that today.
Nope. Not today. That is for another episode. But
so, and bringing all this up is because I think we want to outline that, just kind of sort of reinforcing but also debunking like the mainstream idea of the 5 stages of grief. Like it's never just you go through these stages of grief, you ping pong, but also like things get complicated by family systems. How traumatizing was the death? What was the nature of the death? Like all those things layer in how we react to grief. Also, grief's really weird. Like even in this episode, like as they're yelling, in between yelling at each other, crying, being weird, they start telling like joyful stories about Nellie. And there are these periods when they are relating and being kind to each other and like experiencing, like reminiscing on joyful moments with their sister.
And relating to her pain. Moments where they are, instead of blaming her for being so selfish that she ended her life, we see them starting to empathize with her pain and displace their own feelings of responsibility onto it, and then kind of moving in and out of that, which is one of the things we start to see when we deal with survivors of suicide, is that it gets complicated.
Yeah, like I think either Shirley or Theo says like, how could she do that knowing that's how mom died? Or like how much mom's death fucked us up, how could she also kill herself?
Well, that sounds more like Theo than the first way you said it.
Well, no, I think Shirley says that, and then one of them does say like, well, she was in a lot of pain. Like one of them does I think back it up. If
Luke,
I'm remembering
probably.
correctly. And so it is.
Yeah,
that,
I think it was Luke who said it.
and that does really complicate it because I think we, as a society, also act like suicide's more of a choice than it really can feel to the person who's deciding to end their life.
And I feel like what people don't understand about when the place that you have to be in order to complete a suicide is a place where it's all internalized. You're feeling like it will be better for everyone else if I'm not here. You're not able to have the thoughts about I'm doing this to them because you can't see outside of how much pain you're in. And that's the part that I feel like that would be very natural and normal in this setting, in any setting where someone has completed a suicide, is where they are all this lamenting about how could they do that? Why would they do that? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you don't understand the place you have to be in order to follow through with taking your own life.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a point where you convince yourself that this is the best way for everyone else to go on, is for me to not exist in the problems that I cause and the pain that I cause everyone else. So that it reaches a point where that is the last step that requires convincing. And also, I will never get better.
Yes.
I will never get better. Like, think about that for a second. The most critical component of any suicidal risk assessment is understanding the degree of hopelessness the person you are working with is facing. And the challenge of it is they won't tell you. But the scary thing is that they feel so convinced that the pain that they are in, the distress they are under, will never ever get better, that the only option they have to stop feeling bad is to end their life.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go through a bargaining stage where they convince themselves that if they do all of these things, if they set up this life insurance policy, if they pay off all the bills, if they do this or that, if they leave instructions for all these things.
Pick out a spouse for their partner who's going to lose them.
Right. That give their partner permission to move forward, that they will be able to find peace in that I have tied up all my loose ends. Mm-hmm. I have let everything that was my barrier go. My kids will be fine. My wife will be able to be with someone that can love her. My kids won't remember me. All sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that is, it's so funny that you're saying all those things because I feel like I'm sitting here thinking about all the clients that I've had who have regular suicidal ideation and and they say all of those different things, that it will be better for everybody because then I won't be this burden, then I won't be around, and they'll be able to have time and energy to do other things. Like the amount of the place, again, that idea of that place that you have to be in is not a place of I'm going to do this because I don't care about anybody else.
No, that's not it at all. It's the opposite.
It's the exact opposite.
So people need to stop saying that it is selfish to kill themselves. I have a very distinct memory of an episode of Seventh Heaven, which that show has its own issues, where they would do that thing where every episode was like it's almost like a PSA. Like, this is the episode about smoking.
Yeah.
And so there's an episode about suicide, and the message of the episode, which I still remember, like if I close my eyes, was like literally a character saying, it was so selfish of our father to kill himself, and it was selfish of me to attempt suicide. And I was like, ooh. And I think I believe that, obviously, until I got in the field and I knew better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's hard about the fact that suicide does feel like a choice to a lot of people is then too with like her family and how it'll complicate the stages of grief for them is like, it'll be also complicated by the idea that I could have done something to change it. So it's almost like they have to go through the 5 stages of grief of like, I could have, or one of our siblings or one of our father could have intervened. I think what I will sometimes hear is that there's like a magic point one of us could have like stepped in. Like if we had answered her phone call that night, Like, they get mad when they realize that the dad had talked to her that night. And it's very much like, why didn't you do something? Why would you have kept that house? Like, it's this idea that if we could have changed one or several variables, it wouldn't have had this outcome. And you know what? There's truth to that too. Like, there are stories where, like, you pick up the phone and that person doesn't complete suicide that night because they talked to you. So I think there are enough stories where it brings truth to that thought pattern. And also, there's a lot of situations that no matter what, this would have happened. Maybe not that night, but eventually. You know, because a lot of it is that the individual person has to make that choice for themselves to stay alive.
Yeah, they go through a whole lot of planning, negotiating, organizing, and go through their own phases before they get to that point. And you have to realize that. You have to.
And so they'll have to do a lot of work, this family, of forgiving themselves and forgiving each other.
Right.
And that's more where acceptance will come in this way.
Because even if you think about hearing all of these steps, all of these stages of dying, remember that people that go through suicide also go through these and reach the point of acceptance. They reached a point where they accepted that this was what's going to happen. Now, some people do it impulsively, or some people do it when they're inebriated and their resistance to the negative thoughts or the intrusive thoughts was down, or something happened and there was a breakup or something. But generally speaking, what happens with this, it is something they have been considering for a long time. It is something they spent time creating, evaluating, and deliberating on plans to do so, made preparations for, and there wasn't a single incident where you could have stopped that from happening aside from them telling you in that moment, I'm about to do this, and then getting them into a hospital. But the problem is they're not going to tell you.
And I think what's tricky about, let's say, obviously in this story, Nellie was controlled by spirits. She was tricked into dying. Like, she didn't intentionally complete suicide or even attempt suicide. But I think let's say she had gone to that house to do that. She didn't call people until she was far away from them.
Yep.
Like, she didn't call them when they could get to her in time. Like, she put a lot of obstacles in the way where people couldn't intervene with her. And so you have to come to terms with that too. Like, even if I had picked up the phone, I wouldn't have been able to get to her. You know, it's hard. It's hard being the people left behind after something like that. And now in this situation, this poor family, these poor kids, like, as adults, like, this is the second time.
Yep. And I think something that maybe for the budding clinicians out there to know, for people thinking about the field, is this is a good moment to remind you something that we were all told that you forget. Every one of us will lose a client.
Yes.
To suicide.
Yes.
There was never any equivocation when that message was given to us. But
and if you can't deal with that idea, then this might not be the field for you. Truly. And not in a shitty way where you're not tough enough to be a therapist.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
Like there's no, like, you don't need to be okay with that. You just have to know that maybe this isn't for me. Especially, but also, there's many different things you can do in this field. Like, I work in a more intensive environment, like, setting. You know, there's different intensities of settings that would make this more or less possible to happen. But also, there's no equation that's going to keep you as a therapist from this possibly happening to you over the course. Well, probably happening to you over the course of your career.
Will.
It will because...
Ooh, see, I can't even accept it. God damn, audience. See, I'm even bargaining right now.
Will.
It will happen just based on the fact that we see more people who are more likely in that, where they are emotionally. So just based on the statistics of the fact that I'm currently working with maybe 10 people who are having regular suicidal ideation, like, other people aren't interacting, other fields aren't interacting in terms of those kinds of statistics. So there will be a chance we will lose someone to suicide. Like, we will lose a client to suicide just based on the fact that we are working with people who
There's probability.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just based on that.
And so the other thing, like, it happened to me last year. It happened to me last year. And what it took someone helping me understand, as I had no idea. When I was told which person it was, I thought it was someone else. I thought it was another person who I was afraid was going to do it because of what they had told me. And I thought, oh, fuck. Like, if any of my clients at this particular time were going to be the person, I only met person one time. Mm-hmm. And what we have to remember as clinicians is that sometimes seeing somebody might be a step in that process where they are checking things off, that I did everything that I could, and it might be for show.
Yeah.
To themselves that, see, I saw somebody and it didn't get better.
And you know what I don't like in this episode, which I'm going to fully hate on Theo, because Theo is a psychiatrist. I think she's a psychiatrist.
She's a psychologist.
Is that she is the one, of all of them, she is the one that says, well, her therapist must be a whack job or a wacko or something. Because Shirley says, wasn't Nellie seeing a therapist? And Theo is the one who fully blames the therapist or shits on the therapist. And she shouldn't, I guess she's in her own anger and grief.
I was going to say,
give her that.
I think it's a lot. I think for her, because I think what we see, which is why we wanted to kind of talk about this, but also because we haven't talked about this topic before, but what we see is everyone taking on blame for her death. And not that that doesn't happen in other settings, in terms of just someone passing away unexpectedly regardless. But I do feel like in terms of the differences when you're a survivor of someone who's completed suicide is, I think everyone does feel a sense of blame. And I think they're all trying to all feel like they fucked up in this episode.
Yeah.
Right, or that's find where they can direct their anger to, or who's the person that did fuck up.
And I think when watching it, and one of the notes I wrote is, it's sad for me, especially someone from a big family, that they're not all just comforting each other. You know, they're not letting themselves just be fucking sad that their sister died, and just like holding each other, both metaphorically and physically. And that's probably because their trauma as kids, they've never dealt with that. And I think also is like, that's also a form of like how anger can also be denial.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not going to feel those harder feelings that I feel. Because I think it's that thing of, if I feel that sadness, I will never stop feeling that sadness. And there's a truth to that too. When you lose someone in your life that close, you're always going to feel some version of that for the rest of your life. Hopefully not to that degree, but you know, it's going to be there. And so they're feeling what we have historically said on this podcast, like the safe feeling, which is anger, and not the other feelings. And unfortunately, picking fights, which I think, like we've already referenced, is when you regress to your siblings, your family relationships. Part of that is the way we fight with siblings is so different than the way we fight with anybody else in our life. And anyone with siblings knows, like, there's a safety with fighting with siblings. Like, maybe this is just me, but I think this is true for everybody. We can be really mean to our siblings in a way we are mean to no one else in our lives. And I think so, being in this situation where they're all feeling such deep grief, it makes sense that they're also then picking fights with each other like crazy throughout the whole episode. Oof, it's so complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. I think the only other thing to point out in terms of the family being survivors of someone who completed suicide twice is, well, the way that we're talking about it, I guess, because
it's in the sense of like these two people actually.
Yeah, because it's about the ghosts and stuff.
It's not about the ghosts, it's about the house, you guys. Gosh.
Whatever. It's all the fucking same, Ben.
Oh my God. Love letter to this house. Want to marry this house? You love it so much?
I would like to marry this house.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would.
Cool.
I would like you to be my maid of honor, and I would like Hannah to be the officiant.
I just got ordained, so.
Well, I want Hannah to do more work, and for you to be the one that plans the party.
Okie dokie.
That is so fucking rude, Ben. So I think the only thing I want to point out in terms of being survivors of suicide is that there are some statistics that point out that if you've had someone complete suicide in your life, that there's a higher chance of you completing within the following year. What I would just say to that in terms of if you've experienced this is try and find somebody to talk to. It's common in terms of all of the weight of experiencing the loss of somebody who completed suicide. There's a lot of different things that happen to us when that's something that we experience in our life. And there's a lot of different reasons why anybody would feel hopeless about the future by losing somebody in that way.
Yeah, when we as clinicians, when we do like risk assessment for suicide, there's protective factors, like things that keep you less inclined to commit or to complete, and then there's risk factors that make you more inclined to complete. And one of them is like, is there anyone in your life that's completed suicide in the past or even attempted suicide in the past? Like family history, friend history. What are the anniversaries of those deaths? Like when those anniversaries are coming up, we're a little bit more mindful as clinicians. We keep those in our back pocket when we work with people. Like what are the anniversaries of things like that? And also too, and like the idea that her going to the house that her mom died in to do it, that would be something I could see happening in real life. Yeah. Like without the context of a haunted house.
Yes, I would tell you that the most common thing I hear when I encounter people who've survived suicide is people who start considering it saying, I'm going to go and be with them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yes,
so the idea of
absolutely.
her going home, kind of in that idea.
Yes.
Yep.
And both literally and metaphorically.
Right.
Or they couldn't stand it, neither can I.
That too. I hear more often it's that I just want to be with them. And
no, I agree with you.
The only way to be with them is to
go the way they did.
Go the way they did.
Yeah.
And also it's the thing too, which you talked about before, which is when something happens within a family, it becomes quote unquote normalized.
Yeah.
When someone else in your family has completed suicide, it's more of a realistic thing than in a family where no one's ever done that. And you don't know anybody's ever done that. Like there is, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a documentary about a small town in England where like a huge number of residents have hung themselves, have completed suicide at this very specific like tree. And
I have seen that.
And even people in the documentary, when they go back a year later, have done it since the documentary.
There's a forest like that in Japan, too.
Yeah. And so I think it's also that thing, too, of where it becomes so almost normal, like, to do it, that it becomes a real option in a way that it might in another person's family system or community system.
Yeah.
But it's not just families or communities. It's also professions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there are certain professions that are way more inclined, that are more at risk, as we would say, in the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whew. All right. Well, with that, do we want to go into treatment?
Are we done talking about family systems already?
Are you done?
I feel like I didn't even talk about it. I feel like
we're
still wrapping up other stuff.
Go
Am
ahead.
I wrong?
Well, we talked about the siblings and the siblings' roles, so you can go into it as our resident family therapist.
Yeah, so even if we just talk about this family in terms of a family system, again, I know I talk a lot of times about roles and the different roles that everybody plays, is that we see that Shirley is a caregiver, and really has to step up and really feels like she needs to have control, with which, if we think about in terms of the mom showing that she completed suicide, and the dad then also abandoning them, that somebody has to step up and play that role. So I feel like what we see is, and even when we see them younger, like we talked about, there's flashbacks. So we see them interact with, where you could very much, the twins are like the little ones, kind of what you were talking about, Brittany, but also that the role that we play in our family also shapes the narrative with which we tell ourselves. When we tell ourselves that we are, it starts a narrative in terms of who we believe that we are, who we believe, and why we have this role in the family. A lot of it isn't necessarily intentional in any way. It's just a lot more of the way that this is how the system works, and we all have to play a part. The problem, one of the main kind of toxic parts of this family system, is that there's so many family secrets. There's so many things that nobody has all the pieces to. So, and when we have, when we have something like that in a family, it makes it very hard for anyone to trust anyone. It makes it very hard to not have your backup, because you feel like you have to be on defense, because it's all about who has the most information and what do you use that information for. And when we when that is shrouded in things you're not supposed to talk about, things you're not supposed to do, we very much start to believe and start to kind of create this mentality of, I have to take care of myself in my family. I have to protect myself because we're not really like a whole unit. We all like, I have to keep my stuff to myself, or Luke can only tell Nellie because she's the only one who actually believes him.
Yeah.
Right?
And then that creates splits in the family.
Yeah, exactly. That splits in the family.
Which those two have already because they're twins.
Exactly. And Luke, and then we see Luke as being the child who isn't believed in the family. What does he end up doing? He ends up self-medicating because he doesn't even believe himself and doesn't trust himself in terms of who he is, which has a part of, in terms of his identity, the way that kids' identity is shaped when they're in a family system is that when you have this certain role, you don't really think about the other roles. So you don't feel like you can be anyone else. So I think that Luke in the family has he takes all of the pain. And he carries all of the pain for the family. And he is very much this thing that everyone ignores. Yes. Even though we show that Nellie presents in the episode as somebody who no one else sees.
He's very much, you're right, like he's almost like not there in this funeral episode, even though he is her twin. Yeah. And he holds all of the pain. And even we see the family react to him, right? Mm-hmm. Luke is the one who is hurt. Luke is the one who carries all of the pain. They all rush to take care of him. Meanwhile, Shirley is changing all the fucking light bulbs in the house because she doesn't know how to manage her pain because that's not her role. Yeah. Her role is to take care of everybody else, make sure that everything is okay, and keep her shit together long enough for everybody else to be okay.
Because she's mom now.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we think about it that way, like Luke doesn't think that he could do what Shirley does. Nellie doesn't think that she could do what Shirley does. Theo is probably, I would say,
classic middle child.
I don't ever use that as a thing as a family therapist because I don't think that's fair. But what I would say more of what I see is I think of Theo as the one who holds the anger. Yes. Theo seems frustrated and angry as a kid because I feel like she is the one who holds the anger in the family. Sometimes when a family has so many different secrets, that also sometimes means that only certain people are allowed to have emotions. And sometimes only certain people are allowed to have certain emotions. So Theo is the one who is angry. Luke is scared and just is crying all the time. And like he's just in so much pain and we just have to take care of him. Nellie is very much the person who is trying to help Luke connect to the family. And she is
like a peacekeeper.
She's almost like a peacekeeper role in some different ways. And I feel like in terms of Steve, I think that Steve is being the oldest. Sometimes when you're the oldest sibling, part of what you're always trying to do is to piece together the story of the family. You're trying to make sense of what is happening because you're the oldest. And so it feels like when they come to me with questions, I need to know the answers to those questions.
Because I'm the leader.
And I wrote a book.
About it so that I could show the world that I know what is happening in this family, even though it doesn't even though he's literally ignoring all of the things that actually happened.
Which he believed as a child, which I thought was fascinating because he was like, there was a wolf or a bear or something, like definitely something that was here. It was here. It was definitely real. And then we flipped to a scene of him not believing any of that shit was real.
Yeah. Which could be a straight up trauma response in terms of his mother committing suicide and then him being like, that she has mental illness. This has all been mental illness. Like him having to put that blanket on everything because he has to understand because no one in the family communicates properly. So what if the mother died and the dad sits down with a fucking therapist and says, hey, let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about all the crazy things that happened when we lived in that house. Because once you allow kids and once you allow siblings to have open communication with each other, which can't happen in a family with a lot of secrets, then everybody is able to come to a narrative that makes a little bit more sense because now you have everyone's input. And now you don't have people picking and choosing different things to hold on to because they have to have their backup all the time. So I feel like the reason why the family system plays such a big role in the family in terms of grief is because sometimes when we're grieving, some of those roles get exacerbated. Some of those roles, sometimes Shirley, the Shirley figure in the family, can't keep their shit together anymore because they never should have had to keep their shit together.
That's true.
She never should have had to be in that role of surrogate parent. But also, as we've talked about many times, when tragedies happen, like different things like this happen in roles in families. So it's not like this horrible thing that she was the mother figure, but more of, again, if someone had talked to her, right? If someone had said something different to her about the situation, like, what do you feel like you really want to do? Is this something you really want to do or something you feel like you have to do? Do you feel like you are the only one who can take care of the family? And that's a lot of weight, and that's a lot of heaviness to put on somebody who was, what, maybe 13 years old?
Well, and I would even say, too, like, in that flashback scene where the mom sends her to make cocoa, like, that's a really subtle version of that, where it's like, maybe Shirley's scared, too. Like, why do you comfort the two little ones because they're little?
Yeah.
And you make her go to the kitchen by herself in this blacked out house to make cocoa to calm the little ones down. So even in those little ways, which is, like, not ill-intentioned of the parents.
No.
You're prioritizing feelings.
Yeah.
And you're inadvertently telling the oldest siblings, like, you're fine.
Yes.
But the little ones aren't. And they're allowed to not be fine. And you have to pull it together and do a task.
And we have to take care of them.
Yeah.
And even I have to comfort them, and you need to go do these other things. Like, it's also that sense of, I need help as a parent.
Right.
Yeah.
And side note,
Yeah.
never mind that nobody in the history of anybody wants to go through a dark-ass fucking scary house in the middle of a thunderstorm when the power is out to go find some cocoa.
I would have been like, fuck your cocoa, Mom. Like, I'm not going into that kitchen by myself.
Right.
But I probably would have because I'm also the oldest sibling.
Right. Like,
Same.
in what universe do you want to walk around this scary ass building that looks like Wayne fucking Manor on steroids with all these fucking statues and stuff? It's scary as shit. Do you want to walk around in that place at night going, let me get my little brother some cocoa and like make sure none of these fucking statues that I already think are moving are moving? Hannah is rolling her eyes at me so hard right now.
No, you're right. No, I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's just so, and also the way that, again, the subtle ways that parents sometimes reinforce the role. Because here's the thing.
Right.
The idea of a family system is that the system is set up to work in a certain way. Whether that's functional or dysfunctional. Definitely dysfunctional in this family. There's no doubt about it. It feels very much like a puzzle where everybody has different pieces and none of the pieces connect. So we don't get a full picture of anything. And when you don't get the full picture of anything, what do? We make up our own narrative about ourselves, about our family, in order to be okay.
Right? It's like Jurassic Park. We couldn't get all of the gaps filled in, so we start filling in the gaps with frog DNA. It's like that. People do that with stories. They do that with stories that happen in your brain. You're like, well, we couldn't piece together a full dinosaur here, so we took some shit from a frog over here, we took some shit from a lizard over here, and we pieced that together, and then we got a dinosaur.
Which is why, like I was saying earlier, like everyone's narrative of what happens in their childhood can be different. And
which is usually based on the role that you have. Right? Like, and not being able to see it, especially as a kid, not being able to see it from anybody else's view, because also those narratives are very old and very ingrained in us in terms of, this is what happened, this is how I experienced it, you act like this, you act like this, and I was doing all the work and you guys weren't doing anything. Like, there's so many, it just is such a core belief about who you are as a kid. So if we think about the ages of these kids, the different stages of development that they're at, like, a 6-year-old kid making a narrative about what happened during a night where you disappeared and your whole family is around you and you're screaming at the top of your lungs and nobody can see you and nobody talks to her about that.
Well, and also when you're that little, there's so much your imagination and like pretend and play is so much a part of your brain structure that there's also so much of you that could have just telling yourself when you're older, like, that was my imagination running wild.
Yeah. So I think, so I feel like, what else did I want to talk about? Really quickly, just want to talk about the piece about the dad. So I feel like a lot of the things that are so hard about this dad coming back into the system. So let's think about that. This whole family has been, I wouldn't say successfully surviving as a family up until this point, but this whole family has been surviving without the dad. The dad comes back in, right? He comes back into the picture, and who reacts and who's the most angry at him? Steve, the oldest brother, because he probably had to take the role
of dad
and he did
with the dad left. And so who is he the most angry at? And also what happens when we're kids is when we're told we have to do something that we don't want to do, you do it, and you do it for as long as you have to, because that's how it works in the system. That's the only way that the system will work. But then there's so many other parts of you that don't get to be developed in different ways. And so I feel like Steve very much is so angry at his dad for putting him in that place, for making him do that, and then for making him believe, and then not ever telling them what it was. Yeah. He just never told them. So I feel like the dad has so many... I can't believe... I think about this in terms of what this would really look like. I don't think the dad would have come.
Like he couldn't face it?
I don't think the dad could face it. I don't think that the dad, leaving his kids the way that he left them, I really don't know if he would be able to make the trip. It would make sense in terms of Nellie being his youngest daughter, but at the same time, if he is already so uncomfortable with what happened and knowing and being estranged from them for all of that time, I mean, he was away from his children for 20 years.
Not 20.
Close enough.
He's been in and out. He's been
in
and
sucks.
Out. He sucks. But he hasn't been consistent, but he's been in and out because he tells the grandchildren, like, oh, I met you. So he's been...
Oh, you're right. You're right.
He's not gone for 20 years. He just hasn't been a consistent presence.
It's probably more like an uncle type than like their father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like dad really complicates all of this in such a specific way. And you can see it, like, as soon as he enters the picture, if you actually watch really closely, the actors do such a good job. Everybody's posture changes when dad comes into the room. It's really interesting, which is something that really happens. Like, when we're presented with a new system, or now this is the way we have to do things, you kind of size each other up. That's kind of what happens, especially in a family system.
Yep.
So,
or in a system, yeah, when the oldest children have become the parents, it can become that thing of like, it's like a posturing. Like,
yeah,
I'm the
absolutely.
dad. You don't get to come back and be the dad. I'm the dad now.
Exactly. Or now you're telling me, now you're ready for me to be a kid?
Fuck you.
Fuck you. Like, I don't have the energy for that. And also, my sister just died. My one brother is pretty close to death, I would imagine, Luke. Like, he's used for such a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so to kind of, I'll suck it in a little bit more. So I feel like, in terms of if we are just going to go into treatment.
Well, and also I think too, like Shirley and Steve fighting the most.
Yeah,
very much
also
feels
makes sense.
like almost like they were a married couple.
Yeah,
like we were mom and dad.
Yep.
And you fucked it up, Steve, and we got divorced, and now I got to deal with you. And we have two different ways of raising our kids, which is our younger siblings, and that's why we fell apart.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I feel like in terms of, I'm just going to go right into treatment then.
Okay.
Might as well. I feel like, I feel like in terms of treatment, I mean, it would be, I feel like because I feel like there's so many different sessions I would want to have. Like, my mind is kind of like just blowing up, but I feel like something that I think would be really helpful would be kind of like what we've talked about, what Ben has talked about before, which is like a debriefing almost with the family, but having everybody experience it together instead of it being something where just one person that's
a critical component.
Yeah. Allowing the family to experience this in a different way, in a safer setting where they're able to talk about it, and it doesn't have to be secret anymore, and really reinforcing how important it is to not feel like you have to keep secrets about everybody, which is a really hard change to make. So I feel like I would want to do a debriefing with the whole family, with as many people as would be there. And at the same time, this would be really hard. I don't know if this family would be willing to do this. It would be a pretty big step. Also, depending on how Theo is in terms of if she would even consider seeing a family therapist, I don't even know if that she would feel comfortable doing that. So I feel like doing any kind of debriefing with them, I feel like even talking about, and maybe doing one similar about their mom's death, to be perfectly honest. I know that we talked about the mother's death re-traumatizing them. And,
Yeah,
and
it'd have
then,
to be both.
Yeah, I think that you would do
And
both.
separate sessions, probably.
Yeah. But that another part of doing work with this family would be so critical that everybody has to be there.
Everyone has to be there.
Yeah, there
for
can't
this
be
for
any,
this family.
like,
They all
second-
have to be there.
Because it would be the thing of like then they start giving each other second information. They feel
Exactly.
like the
Exactly.
therapy session isn't held sacred. Like it's all that stuff.
It
And the three older ones triangulate against the younger ones, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Like you would have to have, everybody would have to be involved. So when family therapists tell you that whoever, as many people can come, it's for a fucking reason. The amount of times that I am asked to do family therapy with a part of the family, it's not gonna work.
Nope.
It's
never
not going to work.
does.
I do the best that I can, but I can't. If I don't have everyone engaged, that is what the problem is.
Right.
Yes.
You end up creating dyads and triads against the people who aren't there.
Exactly.
Or you're trying to like teach the person in front of you how to be an indirect therapist to the person who's not there.
Yeah. It just...
Like teach these skills and then teach them to this person who's not there.
Yeah,
And
like-
hope that they get it.
And your bias is going to be towards your clients and the people that are in
Yes.
the room with you. So, like, for fuck's sake, be professionals and recognize that we have to take care of our shit too. Like, that's not always possible, but you have to be mindful that our perception too is going to be biased towards the person sitting in the room with us.
Just because we've heard their story first and
Right.
we're human beings.
Not that we can't be unbiased and they can't process it in a different way or guaranteed to take the side if someone's telling us stuff that's wrong. But remember that that's a thing you have to be conscious of and as a professional be actively guarding against as you're processing people's stories. And that can take you out of the moment from being the effective therapist you need to be of being able to sit with this system and process what's going on.
Absolutely.
All of them.
Absolutely. So I feel like that would be the most important part for the family, is that everybody is there doing debriefing sessions and then just helping them communicate in all different ways, like helping them unburden themselves with some of the family secrets that they've been holding on to for so long. Because family secrets, I know that I've talked about them before, they're very bad. They're toxic. They're like this poison that gets dropped into the family and it spreads, and the more poison that you add, the harder that it is for people to maintain a healthy relationship with each other. Family secrets is only a bad thing. It is never something that is helpful. Or it's a direct barrier to having authentic, healthy communication with each other.
And I think in the sense of the dad, I understand that there can be this inclination to, I don't tell the kids the story because they don't need to know, or I'm protecting them by keeping... And I think there's truth to that. Like, you don't have to go into details with your kids about, like, maybe how their mom died. Like, you don't have to be inappropriate or, like, be so upset that your kids feel like they have to take care of you. Like... And you have to be open to them having questions, and you have to be able to answer the questions they have. There's a scene in a different episode where he comes back to them covered in blood, and I think Theo is like saying, what's happening, what happened to mom, and he just doesn't answer her.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of stuff where like you're not doing your kids any favors or children any favors by like letting them run wild. If they've seen enough, you gotta help them understand. And you have to be open to questions.
Yes.
And you have to be able to answer those questions.
Honestly, and
appropriately. Like there is an appropriate way to do it.
Right.
Like you don't... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's like it's just so important to do what Brittany's saying, because you have to make sure that you're guarding against the reality that someone's mind is going to continue to spin and try and process what it saw, and what it doesn't know, it will continue in question, and it will come up in the quiet moments of night where you have finally laid down and everything else in your mind is off your mind, and then your brain starts the processing because it goes, good, we can process this now because everything else is off our mind. And so those moments when you're trying to sleep, your brain goes, good, everything's calm, time to process. And that happens to children too. And when we talk about details that they don't know, their mind doesn't know those gaps, so it gets stuck trying to process those parts over and over and asks all of these questions. And the problem with trauma is that it gets stored in state-dependent form in the age and developmental stage you are at when it happened, as well as the emotional state. So if something happened when someone is 6, that imaginative, creative brain that Brittany was talking about earlier is working in hyperactive mode to fill in the gaps to what went on that night, and then every possible wild story is going to exist as a possibility until it's ruled out by the brain.
Yes.
And the father in this debriefing process would be responsible here for providing correct factual information, which is why it is important to tell children the truth.
Yes. So I can step in then. Is there anything else more you want to say, Hannah?
No.
So I can step in, saying 6-year-old, I can step in as the child therapist of the group. So I haven't worked with a kid that little in a few years, but I used to work almost exclusively with kids between the ages of like 5 and 9. So really young. And so and kids with significant trauma backgrounds. And so a lot of what you do with kids that little can be what we call play therapy. And that's exactly how it sounds. You use elements of play to help kids process what they're going through. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can look quite literally like I have a tub full of like little like animal figurines. Maybe we have a dollhouse and little family figurines. Maybe we color. Maybe we play act. Maybe we dress up. Like, it's a lot of different things. And I think, and there's also a very popular play therapy technique is sand tray, which is you literally have like a tray, like a Tupperware tray full of sand and different things in the sand. I'm not trained in sand tray therapy because that's like it's a whole other thing. Like, there's like down to like how big should the tray be inches wise. Like, it's a whole field in its of itself, and what it means when kids do certain things in it, and they yada yada. So I'm not it's been a while since I've done play therapy, and I've never done it like formally because there's a lot of weirdly rules and strict interpretations within play therapy. But I think with little kids, like if I was doing if I was doing like Luke and Nellie, I think it would be an interesting discussion about seeing them separately versus together. I think you could do pros and cons of both. Mm-hmm. I think together, the con would be, do they influence each other's stories too much? Mm-hmm. Or do they get caught up in each other's stories too much? And then it becomes this whole other thing that's too fantastical or whatever. Or if they're having trouble talking individually, having them together might actually be helpful. And like having them play together within the confines of play therapy might actually help them process out what happened. So it could be, you can make the argument for either way. But either way, if I did play therapy, it would look probably like I would be very conscious as a therapist that I wouldn't lead them at all. Little kids, you have to be very cautious that you don't lead them. And by that I mean like literally what you think, like asking leading questions. Like, so it must have been pretty dark, huh? Or you must have felt pretty scared. Or, yeah, like your mom, I heard, like, what happened when your mom did this? Like, you really want to be like, and you wouldn't do it that straightforward either when they're that little. It'd be more like, let's play together. Let's play house together. Let's play in the sand tray together. And as we're playing, you kind of let the kid lead. Like, you just kind of pay attention to what objects they're being drawn to. Like, do they want to play with a mom and dad? And they start recreating what happened. Like, are they drawn to the dollhouse? Are they drawn to the sand tray? Are they just, and sometimes it's just they're quite literally playing. Mm-hmm. And then that can be a way for you to have a conversation with them that's a little less intense. Like, we're just like shooting the shit while we play Legos together. Mm-hmm. Or it can be a kid might start acting out the story. Like, maybe they pick up the mom and they start like hitting the mom on the floor. Or like the mom's in a lot of pain and then like another little baby character will come up and start comforting the mom. Like, it can be really interesting way of observing how the kid is thinking of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it can be as straightforward as they literally act out what's happened, and you learn a lot as a therapist, obviously. Or it can just be like a way to make therapy less intense, where you're not just, because you can't really sit across from a 6-year-old and be like, tell me how you're feeling. They'd be like, oh, what the frick is this? And so, or they would lock up. So it's a way to like make the space a little calmer. It's a way, and less intense, a way for you to build rapport as a therapist with your client. And a way for them to work out their play. Like Mr. Rogers says, like, play is very serious for kids. And that is true. Like, they are acting out. That's why kids play house and stuff. Like, it's a way to, like, act out what they're seeing around them and to process through conflict and to, like, you can, like, teach kids how to do conflict resolution with, like, having baby dolls fight, and then how do they make up, and how do we comfort each other, and, like, and also it can be a way for kids to tell their trauma narrative, their story, by doing play or drawing it. You know, maybe you make a comic book out of what happened, or nowadays you can make a friggin' probably movie on the, like, a YouTube about it if you wanted. And so that'd be where I'd go with the little ones to kind of help them process, but you have to be very cautious that you make it, like, as open of a space as possible. And you don't, like, make any leading statements. And you don't try to tell them, like, what you think they're supposed to be feeling, because they will take that and run with it. So that's kind of how I would do the little ones.
So I'm going to go a different direction. I think that Hannah and Brittany have already really nailed what is great. And I think what I want to do is cover more helping. What I would be wanting to do is sit with this family system, and family therapy is generally something that I avoid if I can. I will happily refer out to someone. I used to have Hannah to do it too. Like, here you go. I am very much more comfortable working with individuals, but with this particular family system, of all the ones that I would pick, I would probably pick Theo. Because she is the most difficult and dark and challenging person, but who also would probably be the most interesting client because she's going to be the one who has the hardest walls to break down as a clinician.
Well, we haven't even talked about the fact that she can feel feelings through her hands.
Nope.
Get into that, bro.
I'm not even going to get into that. Because that's a supernatural kind of power thing with her, and, you know, like, I wasn't featured really strongly in this episode because she had glovies on the whole time.
Yes. But there is the part where she's like, don't touch me. And then they don't believe her. Like, they kind of shit on her when she says that. And you can see her whole affect change. Mm-hmm. She's like, so we're back to this place where you don't believe me. Go fuck yourself. Yep.
But what I would want to work with this family on is working on understanding how grief processing works in the first place, to correct some of the bullshit that I am sure they were given colloquially throughout their whole lives, and from each other, because it seems like there was a lot of times where they were an inclusive unit because of what they went through. They didn't let others really into their system until later in life, when they could all branch out from the family and they were old enough, which means that they had a minimum of 5 years or so all together in this system. Because I'm assuming Steve was about 13.
But he made it sound like he left the house, like Aunt Janet's house, like as soon as he could.
Yeah,
because he was like, I was gone by then.
But it must have been by 17, 18.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, maybe he was 14, but you know, like that kid wasn't much older than that.
Yeah.
What I would want them to work on understanding is something that I've been working on understanding as part of. So when we do EMDR or other type of trauma work, it all goes through like a multi-stage process in order to be done properly. But EMDR operates on a past, present, and future model. And what people get hung up on is what it does for the past without understanding how we translate things into the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about with them is understanding what the adaptive information processing model in the brain even is, which is basically we have two areas of storage in the brain. We have the RAM area of your brain where every experience you've ever had, every memory you've ever had, everything that you've ever had a chance to encode, cross-index, and work up some kind of useful definition for exists in your brain in a randomly accessible pattern so that you can put together information together from different memories, different things, all in the names of survival, helping people understand that your brain and every mechanism in it exists for directive one of the brain, which is survival, is important. So helping people understand why it exists is for survival. But understanding that there is also this area where unprocessed memories live, which happens because your brain has this component where if something is so emotionally charged that it scares you or makes you feel afraid that your life is going to end or somebody's life is going to end, it keeps it from processing and interacting with the rest of your memories because it's going, hey, remember that part? That's a very specific thing. Don't do that again. Like, we all have a memory that is almost not processed. Just think about what happened the first time you understood what hot means. We all know. You feel it in your finger. Just like you think of it, the first time you learned what hot means, what don't touch hot means, you know what that means. Memories, traumatic memories get stored in that mechanism where they get stuck. And what is important to know about that is that when we're going through grief, when we go through a loss or something part of our reality changes, that every single definition that exists in your data bank, in your RAM system, has to change because what was true, meaning this person is here, is no longer true. And now you have to connect and process every one of those memories with that person being gone and not in your life. So as you're talking about the present, you have to deal with them not being here now, but you also have to reprocess every single memory that existed in foresight. So basically, you have to process every dream, every wish, every scenario where you projected that this person would be there. You are now having to deal with every one of those predictable situations being not true. And you have to grieve for those as well. So what that person meant, what that person means, and what that person was going to mean, the role that they were going to play. You have to process all of that, and every time you reprocess a memory, every time you work through it, you're readjusting what nodes are connected to it. So what cross-indexing is done with it. So imagine like what that would do to a library system if you were to go, well, this mystery book that's about murder and about this is actually also an autobiography. So now we got to figure out all the different categories this has to connect to in our card catalog system. And it just completely fucks so many things. It's like, imagine what happens if you put weird data in a spreadsheet where you have to figure out which point that this data in this cell interacts with all of these other formulas. And now you have to correct all of that. And that's what happens when we lose somebody, is that your brain has to process all of those emotions, the emotions, and it brings up things from the past, things from now, things from the future. And going through all that is where I talk about like that grief rainbow that I mentioned earlier, where you're dealing with all of the emotions you have about the person, all of the things that you've had, the guilt in the present of trying to suppress the bad memories and only remember the good ones so that you think of the dead in a good light, which you can't do because your brain remembers them as a whole person and you remember them as a whole person, and it's not just or fair to yourself to try to put yourself in pressure, oh, we have to only remember the good things. You don't. You remember the whole picture, the whole person, and you feel all of that as you're reprocessing and trying to put that into a narrative of that person is no longer here and will never be here again. And it's a lot. And that's why grief is so much. It is not a simple 5-step process that we go through in a linear fashion that makes sense. It is all of those things. And there's a 12-step model that exists that I'll share. Instead of on here and reading through that, I'll share it on our social media. And people can see like kind of more of adding steps to it that's not just based on what we go through as we're dying, but what people who are going through grief need to do. And hoping that helps make the process of grief clear as mud, because it is. Hopefully it feels exactly as clear as mud, because that's how it feels to the people going through it, and that's how it feels to those of us trying to treat it, is that there is no clear answer. There is no set treatment that's going to work for everybody. It's about learning to sit and let your brain do what it is supposed to do, which is feel those feelings, because that is how that whole system that I was talking about, that adaptive information system, that is how all the encoding is done, is by pairing the memories with feelings so that they are relevant enough that you remember them and remember what to do with them when they happen. So you have to sit in the feelings, and the only thing that avoiding them is going to do is prolong the process.
Yep.
So being with someone, letting them feel what they feel, exactly what they feel, in as many complicated ways as they feel, with no shame, guilt, or judgment, is the best and only thing to do for grief. Encouraging people to know it's going to be with you for a while. Mm-hmm. You have to find a place for it. It's not something that we can just take away. No one can. You have to feel the feelings. You have to.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, final thoughts?
I'm really glad that I can watch scary things again. And which is part of the reasons why I got to experience the show in and of itself. And it was really just done very, very well. I mean, I feel like we could talk 1,000 hours about this show probably. And I think the only thing that, just as a human, that I feel like comes up every single time I watch it is when the two brothers, when Luke and Steve walk up to the casket. The first thought that runs through my head is, I hope that I die first in my family, in my siblings, because I cannot imagine losing a sibling. Every single time it makes me tear up. Even talking about it sometimes makes me tear up. So I feel like this show just did such a good job of finding all of those moments, even though this family is kind of full of people who are really hard to deal with. Mm-hmm. And creating a story so beautifully that you feel connected to them. So I really like this. I'm really excited for the new season, for the next show to come out, because I know that it's not supposed to be the same. I'm really excited to see. I'm sure that it will be a lot different, but I'm just excited to see it. So I really like this. I'll definitely watch it. I actually am probably going to watch some of it tonight, because I was like, oh, I want to go back and watch the whole thing after just watching one episode.
Dude, same.
Yeah.
Same. Like, I'll just go and let Brittany close, since this was her idea, so we'll let Brittany close this one out. Brittany is our resident horror nerd here.
Yes.
This spooky season is definitely a nod towards Brittany and her interests and talents. But I love this show. I think this is the best show that Netflix... of the shows produced by Netflix, I think this is the best one they've done.
Oh, strong words.
It is. They are strong words, and they're ones that I'll echo, but I feel like this is the best show on Netflix. Is it one that I'll find and watch for comfort reasons, or because I need to, or because I want to feel good? No. But if I want to watch a show that makes me think and ponder and complex and feel and just connect to, this is going to be it, because this show had my wife and I so enthralled in it that I think nothing since like season 4 of Dexter has produced this level of engagement for me, of that, like, I don't know, that thing like when you read Harry Potter, like when you start getting into the later books, when it just attaches to the cells of your hand and you somehow can't close the book because you keep reading it, like that. Or a Dan Brown book, like that kind of thing, when you start like, but what's on the next chapter? Damn these short chapters. The book just, or not the book, but the show just was so good, and the way they did the storytelling, the acting, the narratives, the cinematography, all of it to unnerve you, but make you feel like connected to these people all at the same time. And just the way the story was told was just so good. I love this show, and I am so excited to watch the second season, and I'm very happy that we got to talk about it.
Yes. So, like Ben said, like, horror is like my favorite. Stephen King is my favorite author. And I think this show does what I think horror is when it's at its best, which is really all it is it's talking about the human condition with scary elements, or with like a weird thought experiment bend of like, how would human beings react in this situation, and kind of exploring that. And I like this show. I hope people watch it and give it the space. I think horror gets not taken seriously a lot, because there is a lot of bad horror, and I love bad horror too. But I think this show, the way I try to talk about the show to people as I go, it's like This Is Us, but it takes place in a haunted house. Like, and to give it that gravitas, because this show is so emotionally intelligent. Like this episode alone, like that we've talked about today, like the way it realistically demonstrates, like it pulls such real feelings out of us. I cry when I watch it. Hannah cries when she watches it. Her and I watched it together, and like her first time and my second time, and we both said the same thing. Like, we better be the first ones to go. We're both the oldest in our families. And And so I
me
just
too.
think,
Gosh.
yeah, I just think this show does just a great job of being scary and being genuinely scary, but also being so grounded in reality, which is why I think it's so popular. Because people, I think, aren't revisiting because it's so scary. I think it is because it's so scary, but I also think because it's so evocative emotionally. One thing I did want to bring up, though, is there is a therapist in the show, as we've talked about. Theo is a mental health professional, and the parts of her that they show in the show aren't real, like, to be quite honest. Like, when she touches the hand thing in that basement and she realizes that her client's been sexually abused by her foster dad, and she does an anonymous tip to DCFS, and they go arrest the guy, like, that day. That's fake. That doesn't happen like that.
Nope, not a
You
thing.
can't call social services and give them a very vague... She says, I just know. There has to be evidence, and even with evidence, it would be a long, drawn-out process before they'd ever arrest him. So
And
I just
also-
wanted to speak on that because it's off topic from what we were discussing today. But in case anyone was curious, just watch this whole show.
Yeah, yet another example of therapists
Yeah.
being poorly represented in media.
Yes.
Again, which if you are curious about our full thoughts on that, listen to Step Brothers.
All right, so thank you for joining us. Let us know how this felt, if it was too busy with us trying to tackle one episode of a big series or like a larger part of something. And always you can find us at Popcorn Psychology, at Instagram and Facebook, at popcorn_psych on Twitter. And you can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We're always taking suggestions. We always love feedback. You can leave us reviews at Apple Podcasts. We love that. I think we got a recent one from a guy named Mouth Dork. We read them, guys. We read them when we know your names. So we appreciate it every time. And so thank you and happy spooky season.